The red soil of Garrett's Landing had a smell after rain, wet iron, and something close to old stone. Bren Hallis had lived on this colony for 22 years, and he still noticed it every single time the clouds opened up and let the water through. He was noticing it now, standing at the far edge of the east field in the early dark, mud on his boots, a cold wind coming off the hills to his left. He was not looking at the ground. He was looking at the sky. The lights up there did not belong to any star he had ever learned the name of. They moved together, slow and organized, like a hand of cards being laid down one by one on a table. 17 points of pale fire, maybe 20, growing wider and brighter at a pace that told him they were not passing through. They were arriving. They had chosen this place, and they were taking their time about it. He did not run back to the colony. He stood there and watched and counted them because that was the kind of man he was. Bren Hallis was not brave in any way that made for a good story. He was brave in the quiet, stubborn way of a person who has decided that running from a thing does not make the thing smaller. He pulled out his comm device and pressed the call button for the watch station. The young man on the other end picked up before the second tone. His name was Roe. He was 19 years old and had been on night watch every third rotation for the past year, and his voice was completely flat when he spoke. "I see them, Director. Signal came in 7 minutes ago. They are not answering standard hailing." "How many attempts?" 14. Bren watched the shapes in the sky settle into a position above the cloud line and hold there. He could see the body of them now, long and dark, folded at the edges, like something that had once been built with wings and then decided wings were not enough. He had seen images of DRAVAC warships exactly twice in his life. Once in a colonial history file, and once in an old military briefing that came bundled with the colony's founding documents. Both times he had closed the image and thought nothing more of it because there had been no reason to think more of it. He was thinking more of it now. "Keep trying," he said. "Director, I don't think they are going to." The channel crackled. Not on Roe's end. On a frequency that came from above. The sound that came out of the comm was low and layered, like several voices pressed together into one, speaking words in standard that were correct and deliberate and had clearly been prepared. "This is Grand Warlord Ruvok of the DRAVAC Imperium. You are receiving a formal declaration of grievance. 30 years ago, forces operating under your civilization's authority destroyed 3 of our colony vessels and a sacred breeding perch. 412 of our young were killed. This act was not an accident. It was deliberate, and it was buried. We have been patient. We are no longer patient. You will acknowledge what was done. You will provide reparations. You will deliver a formal admission of guilt from your governing authority on Earth. If these terms are not met within 1 standard hour, this colony will serve as our answer to 30 years of silence." That is all. The channel went quiet again. Bren stood in the wet field for a moment. He thought about the 943 people sleeping and working and eating inside those colony walls behind him. He thought about his daughter Nora, who would be in the medical hall doing her evening rounds with old Petra, probably arguing about the correct dosage of something. He thought about the East Field and how long it had taken to get the soil balanced enough to grow real crops in it. Then he pressed the transmit button and spoke. "Warlord Ruvok, my name is Bren Hallis. I am the colony director of Garrett's Landing. I want to answer you honestly, so I am going to take a moment to do that properly." He paused for one breath. "I was not alive 30 years ago. The majority of the people in this colony were not alive 30 years ago. We are not a military installation. We are not a government seat. We are farmers and miners and tradespeople who came to this piece of rock and built something on it and have been trying to keep it alive ever since. I cannot speak for what was done in the Ember War. I do not have the authority to speak for Earth, and I would not insult you by pretending that I do. But I am here, and I will talk with you for as long as you need, and I will not lie to you. If that is something you are willing to try, I am ready when you are." He let go of the button. The sky was very still. On the bridge of the Ashen Throne, Grand Warlord Ruvok stood at the forward viewport and looked down at the small cluster of lights that made up the colony on the dark surface below. He was old. He had been old for a long time, and he had gotten used to the way old age changed the texture of things without changing the shape of them. He still carried the weight of what he had lost. It had not become lighter with years. It had just become more familiar, the way a scar on your hand becomes familiar. You stop noticing it until something presses on it. He had pressed on it deliberately for 30 years. He had kept it sharp. He had built this mission around it with patience and precision and the cold certainty that what had been done to his people deserved an answer. He had spoken to human officials before. He knew what they sounded like when they were frightened. They moved between aggression and flattery like a creature trying to find solid ground in deep water. He had built his image of this conversation on those interactions. He had been ready for the flattery. He had been ready for the threats. He had not been ready for what he had just heard. Commander Dale stepped up beside him. Dale was young by DRAVAC standards, precise and ambitious in the way of someone who has studied very hard and is waiting for the moment to show it. Warlord, the fleet is in position. We await your order. Ruvok did not answer immediately. He was still hearing the voice from below. The man had not trembled. He had not bargained. He had told the truth in a plain voice as though truth were simply the most efficient option available, and then he had offered to keep talking. Ruvok had destroyed 3 settlements in his military career, long ago, in real conflicts with real combatants. Every human voice he had ever heard under threat had been afraid. This one had sounded like a man standing in a field in the dark, deciding how best to spend the next hour. Hold position, Ruvok said. Dale paused. Warlord, hold position. No weapons. No further transmissions until my order. Ruvok turned from the window. Prepare a ground team. 12 soldiers. Sub-Commander Vrail will lead them. I want eyes on that colony. A ground team, Dale repeated. His voice was careful, the way a careful man's voice is careful when he disagrees with something, but is not yet ready to say so directly. For what purpose, Warlord? Ruvok looked at him for a moment. Because that man down there answered me without fear, he said, and I want to understand why before I decide anything else. He went back to looking at the lights below. The colony was very small from up here. A handful of lit buildings, a few roads, the dark shapes of fields around the edges. 412 young. He still knew that number without trying to remember it. He would always know that number. It had not changed in 30 years, and it was not going to change now. But he was, for the first time since setting course for this world, not entirely certain what to do with it. Below, on the red soil, Bren Hallis walked back toward the colony. He had told Roe to begin the quiet protocol, which meant waking the council members without starting a general alarm, which meant 900 people would spend at least a few more hours in ordinary sleep before they had to know about the ships in their sky. He owed them that much. The east field was behind him in the dark. The new planting was holding. He could not see it, but he knew it was there, which was, he thought, a reasonable description of hope. The hour had barely started. The night was going to be long. The landing craft came down like it did not care very much about the landing. It was a heavy machine, built from dark metal that had gone dull at the edges from years of use. It dropped through the cloud cover and leveled out and touched the ground at the edge of the colony with a sound like a large door being slammed in a house made of iron. The dust it kicked up did not settle for a long time. It sat there at the end of the dirt road, between the field and the first row of colony buildings, and it let out steam from somewhere underneath it that curled up white in the cold air. Then the ramp came down, and the soldiers came out. 20 of them, dark armor that took the morning light and gave nothing back. They moved in 2 straight lines, and they carried weapons that looked built for a different scale of conflict than a colony of 900 farmers and miners. Sub-Commander Vrail came out last, which meant he came out in front, because the DRAVAC put their leaders at the back of the landing order and the front of everything else. He was young, Vrail, with the tight posture of someone who had spent a long time learning how to look ready. He stepped off the ramp and looked at the colony in front of him. The colonists looked back. Nobody ran. Nobody screamed. A woman hanging laundry between 2 posts paused with a shirt in her hands and watched. 3 men standing outside the granary turned toward the sound and stayed where they were, arms loose at their sides. Children sat on the fence at the edge of the square. An old man with white hair and a walking stick stood at the corner of the main path and studied the soldiers with the expression of someone who has decided to be unimpressed and is sticking to it. Vrail had been briefed on human fear responses. He had studied documentation on how colony populations behaved under military presence. None of the documentation had included this. Bren Hallis came out of the council building and walked across the square at a normal pace. He was accompanied by 2 other council members, a broad-shouldered woman named Gal and a thin older man named Wick, both of whom looked tired in the specific way of people who had been up all night making decisions. None of the three were armed. Bryn reached the center of the square and stopped and looked at Vrail and said, "Good morning. Do you want to come in and sit down? We have coffee. Pot is on." Vrail stared at him. "I am not here for coffee," Vrail said. "That is fine," Bryn said. "What are you here for?" So Vrail told him. He delivered the formal declaration, word for word, the way he had memorized it on the journey. The Ember War, the Kirch, the 412. The terms Warlord Ruvok had already transmitted. He had a good voice for declarations. He had practiced. He got through the first full paragraph and most of the second before something stopped him. It was a voice, a girl's voice, coming from the steps of the medical hall on the far side of the square. "That one is sick." Vrail turned. The speaker was young, 17 or 18, with dark hair pulled back and a medic's apron over her clothes. She was standing on the steps with a flat and certain expression, and she was looking at the back of Vrail's formation where a soldier named Grat had been standing at attention for the past 4 minutes. Vrail turned to look at Grat. Grat was still standing. He was standing in the way that a tall structure stands when something internal has already given way and the rest of it has not caught up yet. "He is fine," Vrail said. "His scale coloring is wrong," the girl said. She had walked down the steps without being told she could and was now standing at the edge of the formation, looking at Grat with clinical attention. "The yellow at the edge is there. I have seen that before. 2 years ago, a DRA-VAC trade traveler came through with early Grell pox, and we treated him here. Your species picks it up off-world when you are away from your home biome long enough. His fever has probably been building for 2 days. Vrail opened his mouth to respond. Grat fell. He went sideways and down all at once with the specific finality of a very large and very stubborn person who has been refusing to admit something for too long. The soldiers nearest to him caught the edges of his fall, but not enough of it. He ended up on one knee and then on the ground, breathing in long, slow pulls. The girl was already moving. She called back toward the medical hall as she went, "Petra, blue case, second shelf, Grellpox treatment. Now please." Vrail raised his arm. Every weapon in the formation came up. Bryn Hallis walked forward and put himself between the raised weapons and the girl. He did not hurry. He stopped when he was in the middle of the space and looked at Vrail and said, simply and quietly, "Put those down. She is trying to help your soldier." It was not a challenge. It was not a bluff. It was a statement from a man who had already decided something and was waiting for everyone else to catch up to it. There was no threat in it and no fear either, and it was that combination, more than anything, that made Vrail's arm drop first. The weapons came down, one at a time, soldier by soldier, each one following the one beside them, none of them sure why, but all of them doing it. Old Petra came out of the medical hall at a pace that was quick without quite being a run, carrying a flat blue case and wearing the expression of someone who is annoyed at the inconvenience but committed to the work. She knelt beside Grat on the colony square's packed earth and opened the case and began. The girl worked beside her. They did not talk much. They had clearly done this kind of thing together before. Nobody spoke for several minutes. The DRA-VAC soldiers stood in their broken formation and watched a human girl and an old human woman work to save one of their own. Vrail stood very still. He did not know what to do with his hands. He did not know what to do with any of this. A small shape appeared at his side. He looked down. There was a boy there. He was about 10 years old, with red soil on his boots and a completely serious expression and both hands wrapped around a bowl of water that he was holding up as an offering. "I did not know if your kind drinks water," the boy said. "So I brought water first because it seemed like the safest choice. If you need something different, I can ask my dad what we have." The scarred veteran soldier to Vrail's left, a man named Burrow who had served in 4 conflicts and had once held a defensive line alone for 11 hours, looked at the bowl. He looked at the boy. He reached out and took the bowl with one large hand and held it and did not drink from it and did not give it back. He appeared to be thinking about something he had no word for. Grat's breathing had steadied by the time Vrail finally sent his report up to the Ashen Throne. He used the word complicated more times in that transmission than he had in any previous official communication in his career. He could not find a better word. Commander Dale told him to hold position and that the warlord had been informed. The channel closed. Vrail stood in the middle of the colony square and watched his soldiers sleep in the shade of the medical hall, moved there by 4 colonists who had simply decided it was the right thing to do and organized themselves to do it without being asked. The boy Luck was now sitting on the step beside Burrow, explaining something about root vegetables and soil chemistry. Burrow still had the bowl of water. He was still listening. Vrail could not decide if this was the strangest day of his life, or if he simply had not yet understood what kind of day it was going to turn into. The message came from the flagship an hour later. The warlord was coming down. Vrail looked at the colony around him. The laundry was back on the line. The men by the granary had gone back to whatever they had been doing. Children had returned to their games at the fence. The medical hall was quiet. And at its door, the girl in the medic's apron was writing something in a small notebook, calm as a person writing a shopping list, except that what she was writing was notes on how to treat a DRA-vac soldier for an alien illness on a colony that had not expected to have any DRA-vac soldiers on it at all today. Vrail had been trained to read situations. He read this one and understood, very clearly, that he was not in the kind of situation his training had prepared him for. He was in something else entirely. He just did not yet have the word for it. There is a specific kind of silence that a place makes when something very large and very dangerous walks into it. It is not the silence of fear, exactly. It is the silence of every living thing in a space deciding, all at the same time, how to feel about what it is looking at. That was the silence that fell over the colony square when Ruvok stepped off the landing craft. He was enormous, even by DRA-vac measure. 2.5 meters of old scale and old muscle and old weight, moving with the slow and certain heaviness of something that had never needed to hurry because nothing had ever been fast enough to matter. His scales were the color of wet stone, darkened by age from what might once have been green. The left side of his body carried burned scars that had long since faded into pale ridges, a geography of old violence that he wore the way a mountain wears its erosion. He walked with a staff, not because he needed it for balance, but because he was old enough that he had earned the right to carry one. He stopped in the middle of the square and looked at the colony around him. It looked back. The children on the fence did not move. The women at the laundry line did not move. The old man with the walking stick at the corner looked at Ruvok for a long moment, and then gave a short nod, which was either respect or acknowledgement, or simply the reflex of a man who nodded at large things that had clearly been around longer than he had. Bren Hallis walked out to meet him. He did not walk quickly or slowly. He walked at his usual pace, the pace of a man with somewhere to be who is not anxious about getting there. He stopped at a reasonable distance and looked up at the warlord and said, "I am glad you came down. It is easier to talk to someone when you are in the same room with them. Or the same square, I suppose." Ruvok said nothing. "The soldier your team brought is stable," Bren continued. "Petra and my daughter have been monitoring him through the night. He is going to be all right. If you would like to see him, I can take you there first." Ruvok looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Take me." The medical hall was a low building, wide and clean, with good lighting and the specific organized clutter of a place where work gets done by people who know what they are doing. Shelves of supplies along the walls. A row of beds along one side. Equipment that was old but maintained. Grat was in the third bed, awake now, his color better than it had been, sitting up with the cautious movements of someone who is deciding whether to trust that they actually feel better. Old Petra was at a side table making notes in a ledger when Ruvok ducked through the door. She did not look up. She said, "There is a chair in the corner if you need to sit. Mind the shelf above it. The ceiling is low on that side." Ruvok stood very still. He had been a grand warlord for 40 years. Before that he had been a commander, and before that a soldier, and in all of those years a very particular set of behaviors had come to surround him. People stood when he entered rooms. People addressed him first and waited for permission to speak further. People did not tell him to mind the shelf. Petra finished her note, set down her stylus, and looked at him directly. She was a small woman, older than Bren, with white hair cut short and the kind of face that had made a long peace with whatever it had seen. She said, "Your soldier is fine. Caught it early enough. Another 2 days without treatment, and it would have been a different conversation. Tell your people to report symptoms sooner. That breed of stubbornness is expensive." Ruvok looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Grat, who had the expression of a large and dangerous man who is mildly embarrassed. "Grat," Ruvok said. "Warlord," Grat said. "She is right. Report sooner." "Yes, Warlord." The girl was there too, in the corner, writing in her notebook. She looked up when Ruvok turned. She did not look afraid of him. She looked at him the way she had looked at Grath the day before, with attention and assessment and a kind of quiet ownership over the space she occupied. She said, "I can give you a written summary of the treatment if you want to send it to your medical staff, in case anyone else in the fleet is showing early signs." Ruvok said, "You treated my soldier. He was sick," she said. "That is what we do here." It was the same answer her father had given on the comm the night before. Different words. The same logic underneath. We are here, and this is what we do, and we do not need a special reason to do it. Ruvok had encountered many philosophies in his long life. He had never encountered one that was this simple and this consistent across two separate people in the same bloodline. Bren took him on a walk through the colony after that. Not to show off. Not to make any argument. Just because it was the honest thing to do, and Bren was a man who defaulted to honesty the way other people default to caution. He showed Ruvok the hydroponic domes, which smelled of growing things and warm air and soil being worked. He showed him the workshop where 3 people were repairing a water pump that had given out after the rains. He showed him the school, which was empty this early in the morning but had drawings on the walls made by children, drawings of the landscape and the red hills, and, in one corner, a very enthusiastic drawing of what appeared to be a large winged creature that a child had clearly rendered from imagination and labeled, in careful letters, "Space Friend." Ruvok looked at that drawing for longer than he looked at anything else. Then Bren took him to the memorial wall. It was on the south side of the colony hall, outside, set into the stone. Names, carved into panels, each one with a year. The first panel went back 22 years to the colony's founding. The names on it were people who had died in the first hard winter, when the heating systems failed twice and the food supplies ran short, and the colony had not yet learned what this planet needed from it. The next panel was accident deaths, mining, and construction. The panel after that was from a disease outbreak 8 years ago that had taken 19 people before the treatment came from the nearest supply hub. Ruvok stood before the wall and read the names. He read all of them. Bren did not hurry him. After a long while, Ruvok said, "How many of these people were alive during the Ember War?" Bren thought about it. 3, maybe 4 of the older ones. None of the others. The colony is mostly young families. People who came out here after the early settlement period was done, when it felt safe enough to bring children. Ruvok was quiet. Bren reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small data device. He held it out. "There is something I think you should see. It was declassified 2 years ago by an Earth Oversight Committee. We received a copy automatically, the way all colonial records do. I pulled it out last night after your first transmission." Ruvok took the device. He looked at it for a moment before activating it. The file was a formal investigation summary. It named one individual, an admiral who had authorized the Ember War weapons test without full council approval. It named the cover-up that followed. It named the people who had known and said nothing. It stated, in the dry language of official documents, that the destruction of the Dr. Kirch had been deliberate, caused by a unilateral decision made by one person acting outside sanctioned authority, and that the official account given to the Dr. government at the time had been false. The admiral had died in custody 11 years ago, serving the end of a sentence for unrelated crimes. Most of the others named were also dead. One was still alive, very old, in a care facility somewhere on Earth that the document noted only as a footnote. Ruvok held the device for a long time. He had known, at a certain level, a level below the certainty he had carried for 30 years, he had always known that it had not been the whole of humanity that had made that decision. You could not have 412 dead children and a civilization that felt nothing about it. But knowing something at the level beneath your certainty and knowing it at the level where you can act on it are two different places, and for 30 years he had refused to cross the distance between them. He was standing at the memorial wall of a colony full of people who had not been born yet when his young were killed. And the man beside him had handed him the truth of it without negotiation, without leverage, without asking for anything in return. A small sound came from behind them. Luck was there, the boy from the day before, sitting on a low wall nearby with his boots swinging. He had been there for some time, apparently. He looked at the Grand Warlord of the Dr. Imperium with the frank and unguarded curiosity of a 10-year-old who has decided that something is interesting and has not yet been taught that some things are supposed to be frightening. Is that all their names? Luck asked, nodding at the wall. Yes, Bren said. Do you have a wall like that? Luck asked Ruvok. Ruvok looked at the boy. We have many walls, he said. Luck nodded, thinking about this. I think that is probably the saddest kind of wall to have a lot of, he said, with the complete seriousness of someone who has just worked something out. Ruvok had no answer for that. He stood at the memorial wall of Garrett's Landing in the morning light, with the weight of 30 years in his chest and a data file in his hand, and the sound of a child's honest thinking in his ears, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not certain of the next step. That was new. He did not know yet if it was good, but it was new. The communal hall of Garrett's Landing had been built for function, not for beauty, and it looked exactly like that. Wide wooden tables worn smooth by years of elbows and meals. Benches that had been repaired too many times to match. A kitchen at the back where everything was operated by two people named Dov and his wife Sarah, who had been feeding the colony for 16 years and had never once asked if anyone was coming before they started cooking, because in their combined experience, someone was always coming. Ruvok sat at the end of the center table, which was the only place in the hall where a being of his size could sit without blocking an aisle, and he looked at the colonists coming in for the midday meal, and he tried to understand what he was looking at. They were not performing. That was the first thing he established. He had seen performances before, had been given tours and demonstrations, and carefully arranged displays meant to show him the best face of a civilization that knew it was being evaluated. This was not that. The hall was filling up the way a hall fills up when people are hungry and it is time to eat. Workers came in with dirt on their clothes. Children ran between tables. An argument about a broken water line was continuing into the hall from outside. A man fell asleep sitting up with his head in his hand before his food even arrived, and nobody commented on it because he had apparently been on overnight repair duty and everyone knew it. Bryn sat across from Ruvok, which took some engineering of the bench arrangement, and ate the same food everyone else was eating. He did not make a speech. He did not explain the colonists to Ruvok or apologize for them. He ate and he talked in the ordinary way of someone who is having a meal with another person and is not frightened of the silence between sentences. He said things like, the soil on this planet had too much iron in it for the first 8 years, and they had lost 3 planting seasons before figuring out the balance. He said that his daughter wanted to be a doctor, and he was quite certain she already was one, in practice if not in certification. He said that the most contentious issue in the Colony Council right now was whether to expand the eastern water line before or after the road repairs, and that this argument had been going on for 2 years and showed no sign of resolution. Ruvok listened. He ate the food that was put in front of him, which turned out to be edible, and in 2 cases more than edible. He said very little. He was thinking, in the deep and careful way he had always thought when something was changing, and he was not yet ready to name what it was changing into. At some point he asked, why do you keep feeding people you have reason to be afraid of? Bryn set down his spoon. He thought about this question for a moment with genuine attention. Then he said, I do not think we think about it that way. Someone is here, there is food, it is a mealtime. Those 3 things together have a fairly obvious conclusion. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have, Bryn said. I am not a philosopher. I run a colony. The way I have found to run it without losing people is to decide that other people are people first and problems second. Sometimes that gets us into trouble. More often it gets us through the day. Ruvok was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I came here to burn this place. I know, Bryn said. I came here with 30 years of reason to do it. I know that too. Bryn picked his spoon back up. And I cannot tell you those reasons are wrong. I read the file. What happened to your people was real, and it was done deliberately, and it was covered up. That is the truth. I am not going to argue with the truth. He paused. I am just going to tell you that the people in this hall are also the truth, and you are going to have to decide what to do with both of those things at the same time. That was when the ground shook. It was not a large tremor. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. But in a colony hall, 2 seconds of the ground moving is enough to send benches back and cups over and children grabbing for the nearest adult. The sound that followed it came from the east, a low-pressure wave that arrived half a second after the shaking stopped, which told Bryn exactly what it was before anyone confirmed it. He had heard that kind of sound in old military files. It was a focused kinetic impact from altitude. An orbital strike. Small. Targeted at something away from the main buildings. But real. Ruvok was on his feet before the last echo died. His expression had changed in a way that Bryn had not seen on his face before. It was not anger exactly. It was something older and more controlled than anger, which was in some ways worse. Vrail was in the doorway of the hall with his comm unit in his hand and a look on his face that said he already knew what had happened and was not pleased about knowing it. He said, "It came from the Ashen Throne, Warlord. Commander Dale issued a localized impact order. Remote field at the colony's eastern edge. No structures. He reports it as a calibration demonstration." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then glass broke. The window at the hall's east side had cracked along the old seam where it had been repaired twice before. The crack ran from corner to corner now, and the panel fell inward in 3 pieces, and the child who had been sitting closest to it, Luck, was on the floor with his hand over his face and blood coming through his fingers from a cut above his eyebrow. Nora was moving before anyone else had processed what had happened. She crossed the hall at a pace that was not running only because running in a medical situation wastes the wrong kind of energy, and she was on her knees beside Luck before his father had reached the same spot from across the room. She got his hand down gently and looked at the cut. It was shallow. Head cuts bleed in a way that is alarming and not always proportional to the damage. She knew that. Her hands were shaking slightly, but they were steady in the way that matters, which is at the fingertips where the work is done. She said to Luck in a quiet and even voice, "Look at me. Just look at me. You are all right. It is not deep. I am going to clean it now. Tell me how many fingers I am holding up." Luck, pale and wide-eyed, said, 3. "Good," she said. "Keep looking at me." Ruvok stood in the doorway of the communal hall and watched her work. He watched her hands, which were shaking, work on a child who was afraid, with careful and precise movements that did not let the fear through to the surface where the work was. He had been a soldier long enough to know what it looked like when someone held themselves together by will instead of by steadiness, and he knew which one was harder. He looked at Vrail. Vrail looked back at him. They did not need to say much. The expression on Ruvok's face said it clearly enough. Vrail raised his comm unit. Ruvok held out his hand, and Vrail passed the unit to him. He stood in the doorway of the hall, in the colony where he had come to ask for acknowledgement of the dead, in the same doorway where a human girl was putting a child back together with shaking hands and a steady voice, and he called the Ashen Throne. The channel opened. Dale was on the other end. Ruvok said, very quietly, "Get me a direct line to the bridge." The colony was very still around him. Somewhere a child was crying, not Luck, a younger one somewhere outside, frightened by the sound of the impact. Dav and Sarah were on their feet in the kitchen doorway. The man who had fallen asleep was awake now, standing, looking at the broken window with the expression of someone calculating what it would cost and how long it would take to fix. The channel connected. Every officer on the bridge of the Ashen Throne would be listening now. Ruvok was counting on that. He was going to need all of them to hear what he said next. The bridge of the Ashen Throne was never a quiet place. It was a large room built for function and volume, with stations along 3 walls and a central command position and officers who communicated in the blunt and efficient shorthand of people who spend a great deal of time in confined spaces doing important work. There was always noise, running systems, short reports, the ambient hum of a ship that was never fully at rest. The channel opened to the colony surface, and every sound on the bridge stopped. Commander Dale stood at the central position. He was a tall man, long-limbed and precise, and he had spent the last 2 hours making decisions with the quiet conviction of someone who believes that he is doing what a situation requires. He had authorized the strike on the eastern field with that conviction. A calibration demonstration, he had called it in the log. A reminder of capability. The kind of thing that moved negotiations forward when they had stalled. He had also told himself, which was the part he did not put in the log, that Ruvok had been on the surface too long. That something down there was affecting the warlord's judgment. That the mission had a purpose, and that purpose was not being served by meals in a communal hall and walks past memorial walls. He had believed all of this genuinely, with the full weight of his training behind it. Dale was not a corrupt man. He was a man who had confused certainty with correctness, which is a different kind of problem and in some ways a harder one to fix. Ruvok's voice came through the channel. It was quiet. Ruvok had a voice that became quieter when it was at its most serious, the way a very deep river moves most powerfully at its most still. Everyone on the bridge recognized that register. Every head came up from every station. Dale, Ruvok said. Warlord. Dale's posture was correct and steady. I acted in the interest of the mission. The colony required a demonstration of. You issued a weapons order without my authorization, Ruvok said. On a surface where I was present. Against a civilian settlement. A demonstration, Dale said again, carefully. Remote impact, no casualties, targeted away from structures. A child was cut by breaking glass, Ruvok said. In the hall where I was sitting. I watched a human girl treat that child with shaking hands that did not stop working. That is what your demonstration produced. I want you to understand that clearly before we continue. The bridge was completely still. Not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of people who are listening to something that matters and know it. Dale was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled in the way that voices are controlled when they are working against what they actually want to say. Warlord, I acted on what I believed was necessary. The colony has demonstrated consistent resistance to our terms through what I can only call emotional manipulation. Feeding you. Treating our soldiers. The child. It is calculated to create sympathy that serves their position, and it has clearly. Dale. Ruvok's voice was still quiet. Stop. Dale stopped. You have served well for many years, Ruvok said. I know this. I know why you did what you did, and I know you believed it was right. But I need you to listen to me now with the same honesty you have given to your own judgment. I have been in this colony for one day. In one day I have seen people feed strangers who came to destroy them. I have seen a girl treat a sick enemy soldier without being asked to. I have seen a child offer water to a soldier who was pointing a weapon at his home. I have read a file that names the man who killed our people, that names his crime, that acknowledges what was done. This colony did not give me that file as a bargaining tool. The man who gave it to me simply handed it over because it was true and he thought I should have it. These are not tactics, Dale. This is just who they are. A long pause. The mission, Dale began. The mission was for justice, Ruvok said. Justice for 412. Not for burning the innocent. The man who ordered that strike on our church is dead. The people who covered it are dead or old and removed from power. The people in this colony below me were not born yet when it happened, and they have given us nothing but honesty and care since we arrived. If I destroy them, I am not delivering justice. I am creating a new debt. I am becoming what was done to us. And I will not do that. The silence on the bridge stretched long enough to be a decision in itself. Dale said, quietly, you believe them. I believe what I have seen, Ruvok said. I also believe in 30 years of grief. And I am telling you that those two things can both be true, and the second one does not cancel out the first. Our dead are still our dead, but the living below are not responsible for them. Both of those things are true. Another silence. Shorter this time. Then Dale said, and if the Imperium does not accept this? That is a conversation for when I return. I will make my case to the Council. I have made cases to the Council before. A pause. Do you wish to formally challenge my command, Dale? I am asking you directly, and I will accept whatever your answer is. The question landed on the bridge like a stone in still water. Every officer at every station was motionless. Formal challenge was DRAVAC military law, clean and absolute. If Dale said yes, there was a process, a tribunal, a decision by senior officers on the spot. It was within his rights to invoke it. Dale said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, no, Warlord. Good, Ruvok said. Stand down the fleet. All weapons to passive. Hold position. No further actions of any kind until I am back aboard. Acknowledged. A beat. Acknowledged, Warlord. The channel closed. On the surface, Ruvok handed the comm unit back to Vrail and walked back into the communal hall. The broken glass had already been swept up. Luck was sitting at the table with a neat bandage above his eyebrow, eating something from a bowl that Sarah had put in front of him. His father was beside him. Nora was washing her hands at the basin near the door, her back to the room, her shoulders finally relaxed. Ruvok sat down at the end of the center table again. Dov put a cup of something warm in front of him, without comment. It was not the same drink as before. It was something thicker and dark and had a smell that was unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. Ruvok looked at it. It is a grain drink, Dov said. Not coffee. Thought you might want something different. No obligation. Ruvok picked up the cup. He drank from it. It was warm and bitter and slightly sweet underneath the bitter, and he did not dislike it. Vrail had been standing in the doorway since the call ended. He crossed the hall now and stopped near Nora as she dried her hands. He stood there for a moment in the way that someone stands when they have decided to say something and have not yet found the shape of it. She turned around and looked at him. He said, "Why did you give Grat the medicine? You did not have to. We came here as a threat to this colony." She thought about it for a moment. "He was sick," she said. "I know how to help sick people." Those two things together do not leave a lot of room for other questions. Vrail nodded slowly. He looked like someone trying to fit a piece into a shape they are still figuring out the edges of. Outside, the fleet held position above the clouds and did nothing. The east field smoked quietly at its far edge where the impact had hit bare ground. The new crops were untouched. Before the landing craft was prepared for Ruvok's return, he walked to where Luck was sitting and lowered himself, slowly and deliberately, until he was closer to the boy's eye level. It was a gesture that cost an old body something, and he did it anyway. "I am placing this colony under a DRAVAC non-aggression marker," he said to the boy. "Do you know what that is?" Luck considered. "No," he admitted. "It means no ship of the Imperium can harm this place. Anyone who tries will answer to me personally." Luck thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "So nobody is blowing anything up?" "Not today," Ruvok said. Luck nodded. "Good," he said. "We just replanted the east field." Ruvok looked at him for a moment. Then something shifted in the lines of his old face. Not a smile exactly, because DRAVAC faces did not do that, but something close to it. Something that had not been in the architecture of his expression for a very long time. He stood. He nodded to Bren, who nodded back. He walked out of the hall and toward the landing craft and did not look back, because he was Ruvok and he had never needed to look back at anything to know it was still there. But he knew. The craft rose. Below him the colony shrank and became a cluster of lights on dark red ground, and beyond it the new crops in the east field that had survived both bad soil and bad weather and now, apparently, orbital demonstration strikes as well. He looked at it until the clouds took it from him. Then he looked ahead. There was a conversation with Commander Dale waiting for him. There was a harder conversation with the Imperium's council waiting after that. Neither would be easy. Both were necessary. He had never been afraid of necessary things. That was, he supposed, the one part of himself that the last 30 years had not changed. 3 months after the DRAVAC fleet left the sky above Garrett's Landing, the east field was doing well. Bren was out there most mornings before the colony woke up, walking the rows the way a person walks through something they have put a lot of work into, not inspecting it exactly, just being present with it. The soil had taken the new seed better than expected. The rains had come at the right time and not too hard. Even the section closest to where the impact had struck, which they had all half expected to be scorched underneath the surface, had come up green. Some things, it turned out, were harder to damage than they looked. He was in the field on a particular morning when he saw the ship come in. He recognized it immediately, partly because he had been told it was coming and partly because it was nothing like the machines that had arrived 3 months before. No dark metal built for weight and war. This was a smaller vessel, functional and plain, a transport class that the DRAVAC used for trade and diplomatic travel. It came in slowly, broadcasting its identification codes on the open channel, which was the correct and courteous thing to do, and it set down at the same spot at the edge of the road where the landing craft had come down before. One ramp. For people. Vrail came out first. He looked different from 3 months ago, though Bren could not have said exactly why. The posture was the same. The face was the same. It was something else, some quality that had shifted in the way that things shift in a person when they have been thinking hard about something for a long time and have finally arrived at a place they can stand in. He was carrying a document case. He crossed the road and came into the field, which Bren thought was interesting, because most people stayed on the road. "Director Hallis," Vrail said. "Sub-Commander," Bren said, and then corrected himself, because Vrail's insignia had changed. "Commander, I should say. Congratulations." Vrail's expression did something small and difficult to name. "Thank you," he said. He held out the document case. "This is a formal offer of trade agreement and knowledge exchange between the DRAVAC Imperium and Garrett's Landing, along with a proposal to establish a permanent liaison post here. The warlord asked me to deliver it personally rather than by transmission. He said some things should be handed to someone rather than sent." Bren took the case. He held it for a moment. He said, "And you? Are you the liaison?" Vrail was quiet. Then he said, "If the colony council agrees to the post." "Yes." Bren looked at him for a moment. The field was green around them. Somewhere in the colony behind them, a rooster that one of the farming families kept was making its views on the morning known loudly and without apology. Bren thought about the day 3 months ago when this man had stood in his square with weapons and declarations and the full weight of an interstellar empire behind him. He thought about the bowl of water that the boy Luck had handed to Burrow, and the way Burrow had held it and not known what to do. "The council will agree," Bren said. "Come have coffee while I wake them up." The vote was not unanimous. It was close to it, but not there. 4 of the 7 council members voted yes, without hesitation. 2 others needed a morning of discussion and a look at the terms before they came around, which Bren thought was fair and reasonable. The 7th, a man named Wick who had been on colony council for 11 years, voted no, and his reasons were honest, and Bren respected them even as the majority carried the motion past them. Wick shook Vrail's hand afterward, which Bren thought said a great deal about the kind of man Wick was. Construction on the liaison office began within the week. It was built at the eastern edge of the colony, between the main buildings and the start of the field, a modest structure, low and practical, with input from both Vrail on the DRAVAC requirements and Dov on the kitchen arrangements, because Dov had opinions about any building that was going to have people in it for long periods, and he was not shy about sharing them. Vrail moved in when it was finished. He had a small staff, 2 administrative aides, and a communications officer. They adapted to colony life with varying degrees of speed. The communications officer took 3 weeks to try coffee, and then immediately became the colony's most devoted consumer of it. One of the aides remained convinced that the rooster was a threat of some kind until well into the 2nd month. Vrail himself adapted the way a careful person adapts, slowly, thoroughly, and without making a fuss about it. He learned the colony's daily rhythms. He attended council meetings when invited. He was helpful with logistical problems in the way that someone is helpful when they have access to resources and no interest in making the help complicated. When a water pump broke at the north end of the colony, and the replacement part would have taken 6 weeks to arrive from the supply hub, Vrail made 2 calls and had it there in 11 days. He did not mention this. Dov mentioned it, loudly, to everyone he saw for the next week. Luck found the liaison office on the 3rd day after it opened. This was not a surprise to anyone. He knocked on the door in the morning before his lessons and asked Vrail if he wanted to learn a card game. Vrail, who was in the middle of a communication with the Imperium's administrative office, said that he was busy. Luck said he could wait. He sat down on the step and waited. When Vrail came out 40 minutes later, Luck was still there, whittling something small from a piece of wood with a patience that did not seem to cost him anything. Vrail sat on the step. Luck taught him the card game. Vrail lost the first 2 days. On the 3rd day he won, and the 4 colony children who had by then attached themselves to the afternoon games accused him immediately of cheating. He denied it with a flatness that suggested he had been waiting to deny it. The argument lasted the rest of the afternoon and was the most animated conversation the liaison office had hosted. Old Petra passed by one afternoon, 3 weeks into Vrail's residency, as he was sitting on the step watching the colony go about its business in the late afternoon light. She stopped and looked at him. "You look less like you want to conquer something," she said. Vrail considered this. "Is that an observation or a diagnosis?" "Both," Petra said. "Call it a good sign and stop thinking about it too hard." She walked on. Vrail sat on the step and watched the colony and did not think about it too hard. At Waypost Duna, a neutral station 3 transit points from Garrett's Landing, a formal meeting had taken place 6 weeks after the fleet's withdrawal. Ruvok had come. Earth's government representatives had come, somewhat grudgingly, somewhat confused by how they had come to be summoned to talk to a DRAVAC warlord who had not destroyed anything and was now apparently interested in formal diplomacy. Bren had come, also at Ruvok's specific request. The negotiations had been long. Ruvok was not gentle about what he wanted. He wanted the full record of the Ember War, every document, every name, every covered decision, entered into the Galactic Historical Registry. He wanted it acknowledged formally that what had been done was not an accident, and was not policy, and was not the will of humanity as a whole, but the action of one person, named, with full record of his crime. He wanted the Kirch to be named in that record. All 412. Earth's delegation had pushed back on portions of this for most of the first day. They had concerns about optics and about historical precedent and about what acknowledgement of a century-old military wrong might open up in terms of subsequent claims from other civilizations. Bren had listened to this for most of the first day without speaking. Near the end of it, he had asked to say something. He was a colony director with no formal diplomatic rank, and he asked politely, and the chair let him. He said, "The warlord is asking you to tell the truth about something that happened. He is asking you to name the people who did it and acknowledge that your civilization did not authorize what they did. That is not a complicated thing. It is just the truth. And in my experience, the civilizations that have trouble saying true things about themselves tend to keep making the same errors because they have never actually finished the first conversation." There was a pause. Earth's lead representative looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You are a colony director." "Yes," Bren said. She thought about this. Then she said, "You are right." She turned back to Ruvok. "We will agree to the full registry entry. All 412 names." Ruvok did not respond immediately. He was still for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." Just those 2 words. But the weight behind them was the weight of 30 years setting something down. Nora received her letter on a Tuesday morning, which she remembered specifically because she had been having an argument with Petra about antibiotic rotation protocols when the message came through on the colony's general communication terminal, and Petra had pointed at the screen and said, "It is for you. Go read it. We will finish this argument later." The letter was from the DRA-VAC Imperial Medical Faculty. It was formal and somewhat stiff in the way of organizations that are not used to reaching outward but are trying to. It said that the faculty had received information about the treatment of a DRA-VAC soldier suffering from Grell pox on the surface of Gareth's Landing, and that the treating practitioners had demonstrated knowledge and technique that the faculty wished to understand better. It invited correspondence on cross-species treatment methods. It addressed her by name, spelled correctly, and noted that her age was not an obstacle. Nora read it twice. Then she went to find her father. She found him in the East Field, which was where he usually was when he was thinking about something. She handed him the letter without saying anything. He read it. He read it again. He handed it back. He said, "Well, you had better write back." She was already composing the reply in her head. It was going to be long. There was a lot to say. On the Ashen Throne, which was docked now at an Imperium station for refit and resupply, Grand Warlord Ruvok sat in his quarters in the early hours when the station around him was quiet. He had a habit, formed over decades, of keeping late hours. There was less noise in the late hours, less that needed a decision right now. He found he could think more cleanly in the quiet. He had a hollow image open on the desk beside him. It was old, the color slightly degraded at the edges by time. It showed the Kirch as it had been 3 decades ago before. Green structures on a warm world. Young ones in the courtyard. He had looked at this image so many times that he no longer needed to look at it to see it. It was simply part of him, the way the burn scar on his flank was part of him. Something that had happened and stayed and become part of the architecture of who he was. He did not close the image. He had never once closed it. But tonight, for the first time, he had something open beside it. It was a live feed from a small camera that Luck had apparently installed on the roof of the liaison office on Gareth's Landing without telling anyone he was doing it. He had presented Ruvok with the access code on a small piece of paper handed over during the departure, with the explanation that sometimes it was good to be able to see a place from far away. Ruvok had not known what to do with this and had put the code in his desk and left it there for 3 weeks. He had taken it out tonight. The feed showed the colony square. It was afternoon there, the light going long in gold across the red soil. He could see the east field at the edge of the frame, growing well. He could see the liaison office door, which was open. He could see 4 children sitting on the steps with a card game spread across the boards between them, and Vrail in the middle of it all, holding his hand of cards with the expression of a predator who has decided to let himself be beaten at something and is having complicated feelings about it. Luck said something that caused all 4 other children to erupt. Vrail's expression went through several distinct phases. One of the aides appeared in the door of the liaison office, looked at the situation, and went back inside. Ruvok watched. He watched for a long time. The light changed over the colony. Luck won again, or possibly cheated again. The argument that followed was long and detailed, and clearly one that everyone involved was enjoying. The rooster, somewhere off-screen, contributed its opinion. Ruvok looked at the old image of the Kirch beside the feed. He let both of them be true at the same time. The grief and the green field. The 412 and the 5 children on a step arguing about cards. The 30 years and the morning that came after 30 years. He sat with both of them until he was ready to stop sitting with them. Then he closed the desk screen and picked up the stack of reports that needed his attention, because the Imperium did not pause for warlords who were sitting with things, and there was always work to be done. He got back to it. Outside the station, the stars held their positions, which they had been doing for a very long time, and would continue doing with or without anyone's help. Some distances were fixed and some were not, and the only way to tell the difference was to sit across a table from someone and find out. Garrett's Landing kept growing things in its red soil. Ruvok kept working. The rest, as most things do, followed from there.